According to a 1992 biography, before she was married to Ronald, Nancy Reagan was known around Hollywood for giving the best head. She was reportedly known as Just Say Yes Nancy and was very popular on the MGM lot for her glucking abilities. Napoleon Bonaparte apparently loved Stinky Beaver. On several occasions, he wrote to his lover instructing her not to wash up before he returned to her. The wife of U.S. President Benjamin Harrison died while he was in office in 1892. 4 years later, Harrison married his dead wife's much younger niece and had a daughter with her. His original adult children, who were around 40 years old at the time, were so disgusted by their father marrying their cousin that they didn't attend the wedding. Legendary artist Jackson Pollock died in a drunken car crash in 1956, along with his passenger Edith Metzger. Legend has it that Edith was found with Pollock's bitten off wiener in her mouth. In the late 1600s, a serial spanker used to terrorize the streets of London with his spanking tactics. Nicknamed Whipping Tom, the man would assault unaccompanied women by lifting their dresses and spanking their butts while yelling, "Spanko!" Vigilantes dressed as women started patrolling areas where he was known to strike. At least 70 attacks were carried out before Thomas Wallace was captured and confessed to the spankings. When Blackbeard blockaded Charleston Harbor in 1718, he wasn't seeking gold but instead demanded mercury. Up until the 20th century, it was widely believed that injecting mercury into the urethra was a cure for syphilis. After a long stay in the brothels of Barbados, most of the men in Blackbeard's fleet were infested with STDs. Thus, Blackbeard captured Charleston Harbor to try and make his male parts feel better. The first ever reliable pregnancy test involved injecting a woman's urine into the skin of a female African clawed frog. If the woman was pregnant, the frog would lay eggs within a few hours. William the Conqueror smashed his nuts so hard on his horse's saddle that it gave him an awful infection which he died from a few weeks later. Priests later tried to force his body into a stone coffin that was far too small, causing his corpse to effectively explode. In the 19th century, doctors would perform pelvic massages to treat hysteria in women. Essentially, women would be finger-banged until they reached hysterical paroxysm, aka climax. But these treatments were often time-consuming and gave many doctors carpal tunnel, thus the vibrator was born. A 42-year-old Russian fisherman was viciously attacked by a bear in 2014, but his life was spared when the ringtone his granddaughter installed onto his phone suddenly went off. Justin Bieber's song Baby miraculously sent the bear running back into the woods. During World War I, a 17-year-old British soldier's life was saved when his pocket Bible stopped a bullet. The book has been passed down through his family and still has the bullet embedded inside. The man who discovered the 5,000-year-old mummy Ötzi the Iceman would also end up being found dead frozen in ice 13 years later. A Reddit user from California was gaming in his room when a stray bullet suddenly went through his window and struck him in the head. But he was miraculously saved by his Razer headset, which prevented the bullet from piercing his skull. In 2015, a dying fisherman told his two buddies to use his ashes as bait mix. 3 weeks after he died, his friends used his ashes to reel in this 180-pound monster carp, one of the largest ever caught. Shelley Duvall said the amount of emotional trauma from filming The Shining was unbearable and excruciating. She was genuinely terrified while on set and often pulled clumps of her hair out in between takes. Due to the stress and torment that director Stanley Kubrick put her through, Shelley had a complete mental breakdown after the movie was filmed. The set of Texas Chainsaw Massacre was filled with 500 pounds of rotting animal corpses. The stench mixed with the heat caused actors to vomit constantly. The director said that by the last few days of filming, every time he yelled cut, the actors and crew would immediately puke. A group of psychologists studied 400 movies to find the most realistic psychopath, and the winner was Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men. They said that he seems to be effectively invulnerable and resistant to any form of humanity or emotion. Popular characters Hannibal Lecter and Patrick Bateman didn't even make it in the top 25. In 2014, the incredibly preserved photograph of a young woman was found in the wreckage of the SS Central America, which sunk during a hurricane in 1857. The woman's identity is unknown, but the photo has been dubbed the Mona Lisa of the deep. This is the earliest known depiction of Jesus Christ, scratched into a wall around 200 AD by someone who gave him a donkey's head to mock their friend for believing in Jesus. This is the only surviving handwriting of an ancient Roman emperor. It was written by Theodosius II around 430 AD and reads in Latin, "We desire that you be well." This is the only ancient Roman slave tag discovered that's still attached to its collar. Its inscription reads, "I have fled, seize me and return me to Xeninus for 1 gold coin." Here's a pictograph found at Barrier Canyon in the Utah desert depicting a humanoid with bug eyes and antennae. It's at least 2,500 years old. This is the only surviving example of a Ghiornia from the 15th century. This garb was a staple of Italian fashion in the 1400s, with this one belonging to Diego Cavaniglia, who died in 1481. Before it was found near his tomb in 2004, we only knew of gonorrheas through paintings and written records. Wonder Woman was created by a polyamorous male kinkster who was married to 2 bisexual women. The character was originally made to represent an overtly kinky sex symbol for women, and was nearly cancelled from the start because of how explicitly she was being depicted. The throuple was also heavily into bondage, which supposedly inspired Wonder Woman's rope. Edgar Allan Poe married his first cousin Virginia when she was 13 years old and he was 27. The pair first met when Virginia was only 7 while Edgar was 21. Former Vice President Nelson Rockefeller suffered a heart attack and died while having intercourse with his 25-year-old assistant. He was 70 years old at the time. Most famous for his 6 different marriages, King Henry VIII hired 4 men to regularly check his feces, monitor his bowel movements, and wipe his bottom. They were known as the grooms of the King's Stool, and all of them were eventually knighted. 2 years ago, 72-year-old Lillian Curtis pulled into a Denny's parking lot in Kentucky when a strong gust of wind suddenly knocked the Denny's sign over. It fell directly onto her car and crushed her, causing her to eventually die from blunt force injuries. In 1989, a Soviet jet fighter pilot mistakenly ejected just after takeoff from Poland. The aircraft continued flying for more than 500 miles on autopilot and ended up all the way in Belgium, only to crash into a house, killing a teenager. Near San Diego in 2022, a man died after crashing his car into a parked vehicle while driving rather slowly. Apparently, the knife he was using to mix protein powder while driving was propelled into his neck by the force of his airbag being deployed. In 2020, a Kansas man died after being shot by his dog in a freak hunting accident. He was sitting in the front seat of his pickup truck when his dog stepped on the trigger of his rifle in the back seat. In 1909, George Spencer Millett died in a freak accident while running away from 6 girls trying to give him kisses on his 15th birthday. He tripped and fell on an ink eraser in his front pocket that stabbed him in the heart. In 2011, a 49-year-old Russian woman had a heart attack and was pronounced dead. A few days later, she woke up at her own wake and was so shocked that she screamed and had another heart attack, this time dying for real. In 1999, skydiver Joan Murray's parachute malfunctioned, causing her to fall from 14,000 feet directly onto a mound of fire ants. But doctors think the shock of adrenaline from 200 fire ant stings kept her heart beating and saved her life. 112 people died during the construction of the Hoover Dam. The first to die was surveyor J.G. Tierney on December 20th, 1922. On the same exact day, 14 years later, the last person died during construction. It was J.G.'s son, Patrick Tierney. In 1979, Elvita Adams tried to cease her own existence by plummeting from the Empire State Building. She leapt from the 86th floor but was blown back onto the 85th floor by a sudden strong gust of wind. In 1991, a woman from Thailand accidentally slipped in the mud, grabbed a live wire, and was electrocuted to death. Later that same day, when her sister was showing the neighbors how the accident happened, she slipped, grabbed the same live wire, and was electrocuted to death. The great Harry Houdini once escaped a prison cell while fully nude to show that he wasn't hiding anything to help his escape. But the guards who checked him apparently failed to fully inspect him, since Houdini was hiding the key up his chocolate starfish. Pubic wigs known as merkins were worn by prostitutes as early as the 15th century. The purpose for this accessory was that pubic hair was once considered popular and attractive, but sex workers often shaved their lower parts to avoid pubic lice, and these merkins also helped them cover up signs of STDs from their clients. Early colonizers of the United States commonly used corn cobs as toilet paper, since they were soft, plentiful, and the grooves were quite efficient at getting the job done. The Roman Emperor Elagabalus was only 14 when he assumed power and would often prostitute himself in taverns and brothels. He would frequently stand around naked while swinging his ding-a-ling and would offer vast sums of money to any doctor who could give him a vagina. He was killed at age 19, and his only positive legacy was the invention of the whoopee cushion, which he would use on unsuspecting dinner guests. Lauren Kreitzer was broke, depressed, and disabled after losing his leg in a car accident in 2007. But one day he saw a blanket valued at $500,000 on Antiques Roadshow and realized he had the exact same blanket. It was a Navajo blanket from the 1800s that he ended up selling for $1.5 million and quickly turned his life around. In 2010, Mexican singer Sergio Vega publicly denied a news report that he'd been murdered. 1 hour later, he was murdered. In 2001, Jason and Jenny Cairns Lawrence went on vacation in New York City when the World Trade Center was struck on 9/11. 4 years later, in 2005, they went on vacation in London when 4 suicide bombers attacked the London bus network, killing 52 people. Then in 2008, they were in Mumbai when once again, the city was attacked by 10 different terrorists who killed nearly 200 people. All 3 tragedies were the worst terrorist attacks in history for each of those countries. And now Jason and Jenny just stay home. When he was in high school, comedian Kevin James was a beast at wrestling. He was the top-ranked wrestler at his school, even ahead of his friend and future wrestling superstar Mick Foley, who was ranked second. The two would often face each other in practice as wrestling partners, and Kevin won most of the time. Foley says that when they were teenagers, James was the toughest kid in school, and one of the only kids he knew who could bench press 300 pounds. But Kevin's wrestling dream came to an end when he suffered a severe back injury, allowing Foley to take his spot as the top-ranked wrestler and launch his career of wrestling stardom. James then pushed for a football career until another injury took him out, so he instead settled for a life as a millionaire comedian. The first karaoke machine was built by Japanese nightclub musician Daisuke Inoue in 1971, but he didn't patent his invention because he wanted to teach the world to sing. He earned nothing from the billion-dollar industry he created and says he has no regrets to this day. A Confederate soldier named John Pemberton was stabbed in the chest during the American Civil War. His efforts to control his resulting chronic pain led to a bad addiction to morphine. Attempting to break this habit, Pemberton started mixing various painkillers with carbonated water and soon developed what would become the most well-known product in the world, Coca-Cola. The original recipe contained cocaine and alcohol and did nothing to curb Pemberton's morphine addiction. 6. Victor Hugo, author of Les Miserables and The Hunchback of Notre Dame, was a raging sex addict. After his wife got tired of having intercourse with him up to 9 times per day, he slept with so many prostitutes that on the day he died, all the brothels in Paris were closed because so many prostitutes took the day off to mourn him. 2 million people attended his funeral, and Paris experienced a mini baby boom 9 months later. George Washington had such severe hemorrhoids that sometimes he couldn't even ride a horse into battle and had to be pulled on a cart. The Italian painter Raphael, who inspired the name of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, is said to have died from exhaustion brought on by non-stop intercourse with various women. Ancient Egyptians held a fertility festival each year where it was the pharaoh's job to strip down and rub one out into the Nile. Once he finished, men in the crowd were encouraged to step forward and join in, turning the Nile River into one massive circle jerk. 8. Donald Harvey was a nurse from Ohio who killed 37 of his patients with cyanide throughout the 70s and 80s. He was only caught when one of his victims' coroners had the rare genetic ability to smell cyanide. This prompted investigation, and Harvey was exposed as a serial killer. The shadow of this sign in Devon, England, closely resembles a person being hanged. Coincidentally, it's located near a spot called Dead Man's Cross, where criminals were hanged from a gallows in the 13th century. Just hours after the death of Nintendo CEO Satoru Iwata, a rainbow appeared above Nintendo's headquarters. Fans dubbed it the Rainbow Road to Heaven. In 2009, retired policeman Geraint Wolford was admitted to Abergele Hospital in North Wales. Amazingly, it just so happened that he was put next to another retired policeman named Geraint Wolford. The men weren't related, had never met, and were the only 2 people in Europe named Geraint Wolford. Willem Dafoe has such a massive willy that after filming the 2009 psychological thriller Antichrist, the director had to cut the scene showing Dafoe's member and reshoot it with a body double, because it was so large that everyone in the room was confused. But Dafoe wouldn't have fared so well in ancient Greece, since based on historical evidence, back then smaller packages were far more desirable than massive hogs. Large trouser snakes were seen as a sign of lust and degeneracy, while little dinky winkies were seen as a sign of self-control and civility. This is why many Greek statues have tiny schlongs, while evil figures from mythology are often depicted with hammers. French President Félix Faure died of a stroke while receiving head from his mistress. William the Conqueror smashed his nuts so hard on his horse's saddle that it gave him an awful infection which he died from a few weeks later. Priests later tried to stuff his body into a stone coffin that was far too small, causing his corpse to effectively explode. In 1999, police were called to Matthew McConaughey's Texas home after his neighbor reported loud music and disturbances. When they arrived, ossifers found the actor playing the bongos while blazed out of his skull and completely naked. He was arrested for possession of marijuana. Many historians believe that the crotch part of medieval armor was enlarged not to make the knight's junk look bigger, but to prevent the pain caused by syphilis when their genitals rubbed against the metal. During the Cold War, the CIA highly considered using condoms as a weapon against Russia. They wanted to drop extra-large condoms that were labeled small on Soviet territory to lower their morale, but the plan was eventually scrapped. King Philip V of Spain and his court were known to play a game that translated to the imperturbable. A bunch of naked men would sit around a table covered by a cloth, while a lady underneath the table would put her mouth around one of their willies. The rest of the players would have to guess who was receiving it, and if their guess was correct, the player who was getting socked would have to leave the game. The game was won by the player who could climax without any of the other players noticing. Apparently, this game was very popular among French nobility in the 18th century. In 2012, 16-year-old Kyle Plush was pinned by the backseat of his 2004 minivan while reaching for his tennis gear. He managed to call 911, telling them he was about to die, but the dispatcher couldn't understand him. Within 30 minutes, Kyle died from asphyxia. This horrifying diagram shows how spelunker John Jones was stuck upside down in the Nutty Putty Cave for 27 hours before dying. In 1989, the body of a 26-year-old man was found stuck in a sewer tank at a primary school in Japan. He apparently squeezed through a 14-inch opening to spy on women using the toilet, but got stuck and eventually died from hypothermia. This famous mummy found in Pompeii appeared to be satisfying himself during his final moments in 79 AD. While working his shift at an Iowa supermarket, Larry Moncada went missing and wasn't found for 10 years. He'd apparently fallen headfirst into a tight gap between a freezer and a wall, and his screams were most likely drowned out by the sounds of the coolers. After finishing his regular 12-mile run in 1976, Armenian swimming champion Shavarsh Karapetyan witnessed a trolley bus filled with 92 people crash into a freezing cold reservoir. Despite the sewage-infested water with poor visibility, he swam down 30 feet deep and broke the bus's back window with his legs. He then dove down 20 separate times, pulling out a total of 37 people, 20 of whom survived. Shavarsh then spent 45 days in the hospital, suffering from glass cuts, pneumonia, lung damage, and sepsis, which abruptly ended his swimming career. Reflecting on the rescue, he was once quoted saying, "It was so dark down there that I could barely see anything. One of my dives, I accidentally grabbed a seat instead of a passenger. I could have saved a life instead." That seat still haunts me in my nightmares to this day. Less than 10 years later, Shavarsh ran into a burning building, saved multiple lives, and once again spent an extended time in the hospital due to severe burns. Jill Dando was a highly acclaimed journalist who worked as a host for BBC's unsolved crime series Crime Watch. But the show was cancelled in 1999 after Dando herself became a victim of an unsolved murder. She was shot in the head while trying to enter her London home, and police never managed to identify her killer. In 2007, the Coble family lost their 2 girls and 1 boy in a horrific car crash. A year later, the mother gave birth to triplets, 2 girls and 1 boy. In 2019, a young man named Tyler Moon was running in a Minneapolis marathon when he suddenly collapsed. Thankfully, he was wearing a bib that said "Jesus saves," since the man behind him happened to be a nurse who performed CPR and saved his life. That man's first name was Jesus. In 1915, a distraught woman who was late to her sister's funeral demanded to see her one last time. So the coffin was raised from the ground, and when it was opened, the dead woman sat up and smiled. She went on to live for another 47 years. Former U.S. President Lyndon B. Johnson reportedly had a massive Johnson that he was very proud of. He was known to frequently display it in public and even nicknamed it Jumbo. Apparently, when LBJ used urinals, if another guy walked into the bathroom, he'd turn around and shake his hog at the guy while saying, "Have you ever seen anything as big as this?" Eadwig, King of England from 955 to 959, allegedly left his coronation feast to have a threesome with his future wife and her mother. He was only 15 years old at the time. In the early 1900s, King Edward VII had a custom-made love chair. The chair allowed the 300-pound man to indulge in his sexual fantasies without crushing his female partners. Author of Frankenstein, Mary Shelley, is notoriously said to have lost her virginity on top of her mother's grave, who died just 11 days after giving birth to Mary. She also kept her dead husband's heart and carried it around for more than 30 years until her death in 1851. There's an incredibly disturbing reason why female mummies found in ancient Egypt are always far more decomposed than their male counterparts. Because male bodies were embalmed a lot sooner than female bodies, which were often kept hidden for several days until they started to rot. The reason was to discourage the embalmers from engaging in necrophilia with the bodies. In 1899, French President Félix Faure died of a stroke while receiving head from his mistress. Our ancient ancestors definitely had their priorities in check, considering the dildo was invented some 20,000 years before the wheel. During their expedition across America, Lewis and Clark only consumed meat and had terrible constipation as a result. In response to this, they started taking laxative pills made of mercury, and thus left mercury deposits wherever they would relieve themselves along the path. To this day, if you follow the same trail as the core of Discovery with a metal detector, you can find all the exact spots where Lewis and Clark baked a keister casserole. Chris Pratt dropped out of community college halfway through his first semester and ended up homeless in Maui. He was a daytime stripper and waited tables at the Bubba Gump Shrimp Factory, where he was eventually discovered by the daughter of Tommy Chong while serving her table. In 1950, an inventor was trying to make a waterproof sock to prevent trench foot in soldiers. Upon crafting a latex-coated sock and filling it with water to test for leaks, he found a rip and threw it on his table in frustration. Instantly pleased with the pop and splash, he decided to market water balloons to children. Jaywalking was invented by car companies in the early 1900s to shift the blame for accidents from motorists to pedestrians. The stethoscope was invented by Dr. René Laennec in 1816 because he wasn't comfortable placing his ear directly onto a woman's chest to listen to her heartbeat. In 1980, Star Wars was releasing a Christmas music album, but producers wanted a better singer for the track R2-D2 We Wish You a Merry Christmas. So they asked the 17-year-old kid who swept the floors at the studio, and he totally nailed it. His name was Jon Bon Jovi, and this marked the beginning of his professional singing career. During the Sandy Hook school shooting in 2012, 27-year-old elementary teacher Vicky Soto died a hero while saving her students from the gunman. After hearing gunshots from outside, she quickly hid her first graders in the classroom closet and refused to hide herself. When the shooter came to her room, she told him that her students were in the gym, after which some of the kids ran from their hiding spots in a panic. The shooter opened fire, but Soto shielded the children with her body as they escaped, saving 11 young lives while sacrificing her own. Nicknamed the Saint of Auschwitz, Maximilian Kolbe was a Polish Catholic priest who offered to die in the place of a concentration camp prisoner who was condemned to die of starvation. After surviving for several weeks, Kolbe was eventually killed by an injection of acid. The man he sacrificed himself for lived on for another 50+ years and dedicated his life to telling Kolbe's story. In 1982, the Pope canonized Kolbe and declared him a martyr of charity. In 1998, Wu-Tang member Old Dirty Bastard witnessed a car accident from the window of his Brooklyn recording studio. He quickly ran outside and organized onlookers to help lift the car off of a trapped 4-year-old girl. Using a fake name, ODB later visited the girl frequently in the hospital while she recovered from first-degree burns. When the Red Army captured Hitler's bunker in May of 1945, the only person they found alive was the mechanic Johannes Henschel. After everyone else had either fled or taken their own lives, Henschel had stayed behind to keep the field hospital in the building above supplied with water and power. During the Las Vegas shooting, 29-year-old Marine veteran Taylor Winston's military training kicked into action. He quickly stole someone's truck to drive any wounded victims to the hospital. He and his girlfriend made 2 trips as the shooting took place, picking up the most critically injured victims, and his heroic action likely saved over a dozen lives.